I stepped into Laura's Atlanta condo, the late morning sun slicing through the floor to ceiling windows, casting sharp shadows across the hardwood floor. The air buzzed with the low hum of wealth, crystal chandeliers glinting overhead, the faint scent of leather from the furniture, the distant clink of champagne glasses being set out on a marble countertop. It was the kind of place that screamed power, the kind of place where every smile hit a knife. I adjusted the strap of my purse, my heels clicking against the polished wood as I scanned the room. A brunch, Laura had called it, a casual get-together. But nothing about Laura or her brother Daniel was ever casual. The condo was alive with the murmur of voices, a handful of Atlanta's elite milling about in their pressed suits and tailored dresses. I spotted Laura first, standing near the kitchen island, her blonde hair swept into a perfect updo, her laughter sharp and practiced as she charmed some gray-haired lawyer type. She caught my eye and waved me over, her smile wide but tight at the edges, like it might crack if you press too hard. I forced a smile back, weaving through the crowd, my stomach already twisting. I'd been to enough of these things to know the game. Everyone here was either a predator or prey, and I wasn't sure which I was today. Emily, you made it. Laura's voice was syrup sweet, her hand brushing my arm as she pulled me into a quick, perfunctory hug. Up close, her perfume was overpowering, something floral and expensive, clinging to the air like a warning. I was just telling Richard here about that deal you closed last month. Brilliant work. Thanks, I said, keeping my tone light, my eyes flicking to Richard. He nodded, all teeth and handshake, before excusing himself to grab another drink. I turned back to Laura, about to say something polite, when Daniel appeared at her side, silent as a shadow. He'd always had that way about him, sliding into a room like he owned it, his presence heavy despite the easy grin plastered across his face. Emily, he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. Good to see you. His dark eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I felt the air shift like the temperature had dropped a degree. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling up from them, and he extended one toward me. Thought you might need this. Long week, right? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the handle. The mug was plain white, unassuming, but there was something off about the way he offered it, his smile stretching just a little too wide, his grip on the other mug just a little too tight. Yeah, I said, taking it from him, my voice steady despite the sudden prickle at the back of my neck. Long week. I brought the coffee to my lips, pausing as the scent hit me. It wasn't right. Beneath the familiar bitterness, there was something else, sharp chemical, like bleach or bad almonds. My pulse kicked up, but I kept my face neutral, lowering the mug, without drinking. Daniel was watching me, his head tilted slightly, that odd smile still in place. Laura was saying something about the menu, mimosas, quiche, some artisanal nonsense, but I couldn't focus on her words. My mind was racing, sifting through the haze of memory. I'd felt this before. Not the smell exactly, but the unease. The dinners with Daniel and Laura over the past year. The ones that always seemed to leave me sick the next day, doubled over with nausea, blaming it on bad shrimp or too much wine. I'd never thought much of it, chalking it up to coincidence. But now, standing here with that strange coffee in my hand, the pieces started clicking together, sharp and jagged. Something wrong? Daniel asked, his tone casual, but his eyes narrowing just enough to betray him. He took a sip from his own mug, slow and deliberate, like he was proving a point. No, I lied, forcing a smile. Just savoring the aroma. My heart was hammering now, my grip on the mug tightening as I fought to keep my composure. I glanced at Laura, still chattering away, oblivious or pretending to be. The room felt smaller, the chatter louder, the sunlight harsher. I didn't know what was in that coffee, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't drinking it. I set the mug down on the island, casual as I could manage and excused myself to the bathroom. My legs felt unsteady as I crossed the room, the weight of Daniel's stare burning into my back. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. Not yet. But as I slipped into the hallway, the question clawed at me, raw and relentless. What the hell were they playing at? The bathroom door clicked shut behind me, and I leaned against it, my breath shallow, the mug strange scent still lingering in my mind. The condo's chatter faded into a dull hum beyond the oak panel, but it didn't calm the storm brewing inside me. My hands trembled as I set my purse on the marble counter, the cold stone biting into my palms. I needed a moment, just one damn moment, to think. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, pale, wide-eyed, a crease of worry etched between my brows. I turned on the faucet, letting the rush of water drown out the noise in my head, and splashed my face, hoping it'd jolt me back to reason. It didn't. All I could see was Daniel's face, those dark, unblinking eyes, that too perfect smile as he handed me the coffee, and Laura, flitting around like some southern belle, all charm and no substance. I trusted them, maybe not fully, but enough to sit at their table, laugh at their jokes, let them into my world. Now, that trust was unraveling thread by thread, and I couldn't stop it. I dried my hands on a monogrammed towel, LH stitched in gold thread, and stared at the fabric, my mind drifting back. It wasn't the first time I'd felt this way, this gnawing suspicion. Last summer, at their lake house, I'd spent the night after a barbecue, grilled shrimp, sweet tea, Laura's famous pecan pie. The next morning, I'd woken up dizzy, my stomach churning like I'd swallowed glass. I blamed the heat, the food sitting out too long. Daniel had even brought me a ginger ale, hovering by the couch with that same easy grin, asking if I was okay. I'd thanked him, waved it off. Coincidence, I told myself. Then there was Thanksgiving at their Buckhead rental. Turkey, stuffing, a bottle of Pinot Noir Daniel insisted on pouring for me. I'd been sick for 2 days after, feverish, my head pounding like a drum. Laura had texted, all concern and emojis, telling me to feel better. I bought it. God, I bought it every time. I gripped the sink's edge, the memories flooding back, sharp and accusing. How many times had I let it slide? How many meals, how many drinks, how many mornings spent curled up in bed, cursing my weak stomach? The pattern was there, staring me in the face, and I'd been too blind or too stubborn to see it. But that coffee, that smell, it wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was a warning. My phone buzzed in my purse, snapping me out of it. I fished it out, my hands still unsteady. A text from Laura. Asterisk, where'd you run off to? Food's ready. Asterisk, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What was I supposed to say? Hey, did your brother just try to poison me? The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. But the fear was real, coiling tight in my chest, and it wasn't letting go. I shoved the phone back in my purse and paced the small bathroom, the tiles cool under my feet. I needed proof. Suspicion wasn't enough, not against people like Daniel and Laura, with their money, their connections, their polished lies. They'd laugh it off, twist it around, make me look paranoid. I could already hear Laura's voice, dripping with pity. Oh, Emily, you must be stressed. Maybe take some time off. And Daniel, standing there, silent and smug, knowing he'd won. No, I wasn't going to let them bury me that easily. I stopped pacing, my reflection catching my eye again. The fear was still there, but something else was creeping in. Anger, hot and jagged, cutting through the haze. If they were playing a game, I'd play too, but I'd play smarter. I straightened up, smoothed my hair, and took a deep breath. The coffee was still out there, sitting on the island, untouched. If I could get it, test it somehow, I'd have something concrete. I didn't know how yet. Dump it in a bag, call a lab, figure it out later. But I wasn't walking away empty-handed. Not this time. I slipped out of the bathroom, the hallway dim and quiet compared to the brunch's chaos. The murmur of voices grew louder as I approached the living room, my pulse thudding in my ears. I rounded the corner, and there they were, Laura by the island, gesturing with a champagne flute, Daniel leaning against the counter, his mug still in hand. He saw me first, his head tilting slightly, that smile flickering back to life. Feeling better? He asked, his voice smooth as silk, but there was an edge to it now, a question lurking beneath the words. Yeah, I said, matching his tone, forcing my lips into a curve. Just needed a minute. I stepped closer to the island, my eyes darting to my mug. It was still there, steam faint, but rising, the liquid dark, and still. My fingers itched to grab it, but I couldn't. Not yet, not with him watching. Laura turned, her laugh cutting through the tension. You're missing the quiche, Emily. Come on, sit down. Daniel's been raving about the coffee. He brewed it himself. I froze, my gaze snapping to him. He raised his mug in a mock toast, his eyes locked on mine. Special blend, he said, taking another sip. Just for you. The room tilted, the air thickening with something I couldn't name, distrust, fear, a slow-burning fury. I didn't know what was in that coffee, but I knew one thing, I wasn't the prey here anymore. I stood there, pinned under Daniel's gaze, the weight of his words, special blend, just for you, hanging in the air like a loaded gun. The brunch buzzed around me, a blur of clinking glasses and shallow laughter, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. My mug sat on the island, taunting me, its faint steam curling upward like a dare. I wanted to lunge for it, pour it into something, anything, and run, but I couldn't, not with him standing there, sipping his own coffee, his eyes daring me to flinch. Laura's voice sliced through the haze. Emily, you're so quiet today. Everything all right? She tilted her head, her smile syrupy, but there was a flicker in her eyes. Something sharp, like she was testing me too. Yeah, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, just taking it all in. I forced a laugh, light and hollow, and stepped closer to the island, resting my hand near the mug. My fingers brushed the handle, casual as I could make it, but my heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I needed a plan, a real one, not this half-baked instinct screaming at me to grab and go. The dining room stretched out beyond the island, a long oak table set with platters of quiche and pastries, sunlight streaming through the windows and glinting off the silverware. Guests were drifting toward it, plates in hand, their chatter rising as Laura waved them over with a flourish. Come on, everyone, dig in, she called, her voice bright and commanding. It was chaos, controlled but messy, the perfect cover. I glanced at Daniel. He hadn't moved, still leaning against the counter, his mug cradled in his hands like a shield. His eyes flicked to mine, then away, following Laura as she swept toward the table. For a second, I was invisible. That was my shot. I turned, pretending to follow the crowd, my hand sliding the mug off the island in one smooth motion. It was heavier than I expected, the coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim, but I kept moving, weaving through the bodies toward the dining room. My purse hung over my shoulder, unsipped just enough. I could dump the coffee in there, maybe into a plastic liner if I had one. I didn't stop to think it through. I just needed it out of sight, out of their reach. The dining room was a swarm of motion, people jostling for seats, reaching across the table, voices overlapping in a dull roar. I slipped into the fray, my eyes scanning for Laura. She was at the far end, pouring mimosas, her back to me. Good. I edged closer to the table, my mug still in hand, the strange smell hitting me again. Bitter, wrong, like something rotting beneath the surface. My stomach twisted, but I swallowed it down. No time for doubt. I set the mug on the table, next to Laura's, hers a sleek black ceramic thing, half full, steam rising lazily. They looked almost identical in the chaos, and that sparked something in me, a reckless, desperate idea. If I could switch them, if I could make her drink it instead. I didn't know what I expected. Proof, revenge, or just a way to turn their game back on them. My hand hovered, trembling, as the room spun around me. Emily, you've got to try this quiche. A voice chirped, some woman in a floral dress shoving a plate my way. I stumbled, my hip bumping the table, and the mugs wobbled. Instinct took over. I grabbed Laura's mug, swapped it with mine in one clumsy motion, and steadied them both before anyone noticed. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the chatter, the clatter of forks. I stepped back, clutching my purse, my eyes locked on the black mug, my mug, now sitting where hers had been. Laura turned, mimosa pitcher in hand, and reached for it without a glance. Daniel's right, she said, lifting the mug to her lips. This coffee's to die for. She took a sip, then another, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment like she was savoring it. I held my breath, waiting for what? I wasn't sure. A cough? A gasp? Something to tell me I wasn't crazy? Nothing happened. She set the mug down, smiled at me, and went back to pouring drinks. My knees felt weak, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? The smell, the sickness, the way Daniel had watched me? I wanted to scream, to smash the mug on the floor and demand answers, but I couldn't. Not here, not now. Emily, Daniel's voice cut through the noise, low and close. I spun around. He was right behind me, his mug still in hand, his smile gone. You didn't drink yours, he said, nodding toward the table, toward Laura's mug, now in my spot. His eyes narrowed, just a fraction, but it was enough. He knew. I'm not thirsty, I said, my voice tight, my hand gripping my purse strap like a lifeline. He stepped closer, the air between us thickening, and I felt it, the shift, the moment the mask slipped. He wasn't smiling anymore. Pity, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. It's a special blend, after all. The room closed in, the sunlight too bright, the voices too loud. I didn't know if I just dodged a bullet or fired one, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The dining room pulsed with the chaos of the brunch, a tangle of voices and clinking china, but all I could focus on was Daniel's face, those dark eyes boring into me, his words echoing in my skull. Asterisk, it's a special blend, after all. Asterisk, the air felt thick, suffocating, like I'd stepped into a trap I couldn't see. My hand tightened around my purse strap, the weight of Laura's mug, now mine, still warm against my hip where I'd stashed it in the chaos of the swap. I'd done it. I'd turned the game back on them. But standing there, with Daniel so close I could smell the faint cedar of his cologne, I wasn't sure if I'd won or just lit the fuse. The table stretched out before us, a battlefield of half-eaten quiche and spilled mimosa, the sunlight pouring through the windows and glinting off the glassware like shards of a broken promise. Laura was still at the far end, her laughter ringing out as she poured drinks, oblivious to the shift in the air. Or so I thought. My eyes darted to the black mug, my mug, sitting where I'd left it, the steam barely visible now, the dark liquid inside still and silent. She'd drunk from it, and nothing had happened. Yet, my chest tightened, doubt creeping in like a cold draft. Had I misread it all? The smell, the sickness, the way Daniel smiled didn't reach his eyes. Emily, Daniel said again, his voice low, cutting through the noise like a blade. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me, and I fought the urge to back away. You look pale. Sure you're all right. His tone was smooth, almost concerned, but there was something underneath it, something hard and probing, like he was waiting for me to crack. I'm fine, I said, forcing the words out, my lips curving into a smile I didn't feel. Just enjoying the party. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud enough I was sure he could hear it. I needed to move, to break this moment before he saw through me, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. He tilted his head, studying me, his mug still cradled in his hands. Good, he said, taking a slow sip, his eyes never leaving mine. Wouldn't want you to miss out. There was a challenge in his voice, a dare I couldn't quite decipher. Did he know I'd switched the cups? Or was he just toying with me, keeping me off balance? Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I turned, my gaze sweeping the room for an escape, when Laura's voice cut through the din. "Oh, this quiche's divine," she called, her tone bright and performative as she waved a fork in the air. She was closer now, drifting back toward us, the black mug in her other hand. My breath caught as she raised it to her lips again, her eyes fluttering shut like she was savoring it just like before. I waited, my pulse a frantic drumbeat, every muscle in my body coiled tight. Then it happened. Her step faltered, just a slight stumble at first, barely noticeable in the bustle of the room. The mug slipped from her hand, hitting the hardwood with a dull thud, coffee spilling in a dark arc across the floor. She clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Daniel," she rasped, her voice thinning, her perfect updo tilting as her head lolled forward. The room seemed to freeze, the chatter dying into a stunned hush as she sank to her knees, one hand clawing at her throat. Relief hit me first, sharp and dizzying, like a weight lifting off my chest. I hadn't imagined it. The coffee, the special blend, it was real, and I'd turned it back on them. But the relief twisted fast, morphing into something hotter, something feral. Anger surged through me, burning away the fear, as I watched Laura collapse, her polished facade crumbling into a heap on the floor. She'd been in on it. They both had, and I'd almost been the one choking on whatever they'd slipped into that mug. "Laura!" Daniel's voice cracked through the silence, raw and panicked. He dropped his own mug, coffee splashing across his shoes, and lunged for her, kneeling beside her as the crowd parted, wide-eyed and whispering. "What the hell, Laura, stay with me." His hands hovered over her, trembling, his cool mask shattered. For the first time, he looked human, scared, out of control. It should have felt good, seeing him unravel, but all I could think was, asterisk, this is it. This is my shot. Asterisk, my hand slipped into my purse, fingers brushing the cold edge of my phone. I pulled it out, my thumb shaking as I hit record, the red dot blinking to life. I stepped closer, keeping the lens trained on them, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What's in the coffee, Daniel?" I asked, loud enough for the mic to catch it, loud enough for the room to hear. Heads turned, eyes narrowing, the air thickening with suspicion. He froze, his head snapping up to meet my gaze. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his face paling, sweat beading on his brow. Laura coughed, a wet, ragged sound, her body slumping against the table leg. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her gently, but his eyes stayed on me, wild and cornered. "You tell me," I said, stepping closer, my voice rising. "What's in it? What were you two planning?" The words poured out, fueled by months of doubt, of sickness, of pretending I didn't see the knives behind their smiles. I didn't care who was listening. The lawyer by the window, the woman with the floral dress, the whole damn room. Let them hear it. Let them know. "Emily, stop." Daniel started, but Laura cut him off, her voice a strained whisper. "Shut up, Daniel," she croaked, her head lolling toward me. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, but there was a flicker of something, resignation, maybe, or spite. "She's got us." She coughed again, her lips twisting into a bitter half-smile. It was cyanide, just a little, enough to make her sick, keep her out of the way. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath, but I didn't flinch. Cyanide. The word landed like a punch, confirmation of every fear I'd buried. Every night I'd spent curled up in pain, blaming myself. My hand tightened around the phone, the red dot still blinking, capturing it all. Vindication washed over me, cold and sweet, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Why? I demanded, my voice trembling now, not with fear, but with rage. Why me? Laura's laugh was weak, broken. You were too good, Emily. Too smart. The firm, Daniel's firm, it was slipping, and you were the golden girl. We couldn't let you take it. She slumped further, her breath hitching, as Daniel stared at her, his face a mask of horror. Laura, don't, he pleaded, but she ignored him, her eyes locked on mine. He wanted you gone, she whispered. I just went along. The confession hung there, raw and ugly, as the room spun around me. Paramedics burst through the door. I hadn't even heard anyone call them, shouting orders pushing through the crowd. Daniel scrambled back, his hands raised, his eyes darting between me and Laura like a trapped animal. I kept recording, my arm steady even as my knees shook, the truth spilling out in front of me like blood on the floor. They'd tried to kill me, or at least ruin me, and I'd turned it back on them. Laura's collapse, Daniel's panic, the cyanide, it was all there caught on my phone, undeniable. But as the medics swarmed her, as the room erupted into chaos, I felt the weight of it settle on me. The cost, the betrayal, the line I'd just crossed. I'd wanted justice, revenge, something to make it right. Now I had it, and it didn't feel like winning. The condo's study loomed at the end of the hallway. Its heavy oak door cracked just enough to let a sliver of light spill out onto the hardwood. The chaos of the dining room. Laura's collapse, the paramedics' shouts, the crowd's stunned murmurs, faded into a dull roar behind me as I slipped away, my phone still clenched in my hand, the red dot blinking like a heartbeat. My heels clicked against the floor, each step a deliberate push against the panic clawing at my chest. I needed space, a moment to breathe, to process what had just happened, what I'd made happen. But more than that, I needed answers. Laura's confession had cracked the dam, and now the flood was coming. I could feel it. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking faintly, and stepped into the room. The air was cooler here, thick with the scent of old leather and polished wood. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers, a sleek laptop, and a half-empty bottle of bourbon glinting in the dim light of a brass lamp. Bookshelves lined the walls, their spines a testament to wealth and ambition. Legal tomes, business manifestos, a few first editions I recognized from Laura's endless bragging. This wasn't just a study, it was a throne room, a place where deals were struck and fates decided. And it was Daniel's. Every inch of it screamed his name, his control, his cold, calculated world. My breath hitched as I closed the door behind me, the click of the latch loud in the silence. The weight of the phone in my hand grounded me, its recording still running, capturing the faint hum of the condo beyond the walls. Laura's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, he wanted you gone. I just went along. Asterisk gone. Not just sidelined, not just humiliated. Asterisk gone star. The word rolled through me, heavy and final, stirring something dark and restless. I'd known the firm was a snake pit, but this was personal, and I needed to know why. I set the phone on the desk, angling it toward me, and sank into the leather chair. It creaked under my weight, the cushion still warm from whoever'd sat here last, Daniel probably plotting his next move. My hands trembled as I reached for the papers scattered across the surface, my eyes scanning the mess for anything that might explain it. Invoices, contracts, a handwritten note in Laura's looping scrawl, asterisk caller, about the merger. Asterisk, nothing jumped out. Not yet, but the urgency in my gut told me it was here, buried in the chaos. I just had to find it. The laptop hummed faintly, Its screen dark but alive, a blinking cursor in the corner daring me to touch it. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keys. This wasn't my world, hacking, digging, crossing lines I couldn't uncross. But the rules had changed the second Laura hit the floor. I tapped the spacebar, and the screen flared to life, a password prompt staring back at me. My mind raced, grasping for something, anything. Laura's birthday? No, too obvious. The firm's founding date. I typed 1997, a guess, a stab in the dark, and the screen flickered, then unlocked. My pulse surged. Dumb luck or arrogance on Daniel's part. I didn't care. I was in. The desktop was a maze of folders, client files, financials, personal documents. I clicked on one labeled E.C, my initials, Emily Carter, and my stomach dropped. A spreadsheet opened, rows and columns charting my every move at the firm. Deals I'd closed, meetings I'd led, even personal notes. Asterisk, lunch with J. Harris, March 14th. Pushing for promotion. Asterisk, they'd been watching me, tracking me, building a case. But it was the last entry that stopped me cold. Asterisk, out by Q3. Coffee plan confirmed. Asterisk, Q3. That was now. And coffee plan, the words blurred as my vision tunneled, the pieces snapping into place with brutal clarity. I leaned back, the chair groaning, my breath shallow and ragged. They hadn't just wanted me sick. They'd wanted me out of the picture, permanently sidelined. Maybe worse. Cyanide wasn't a prank. It was a weapon. And I'd been the target all along, not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd done everything right. Too good, Laura had said. Too smart. The golden girl threatening Daniel's crumbling empire. My hands curled into fists, nails biting into my palms as a wave of fury crashed over me, hot and blinding. I'd trusted them, worked for them, bled for that firm, and this was my reward. A noise snapped me out of it, a muffled thud from the hallway, followed by voices, sharp and urgent. The paramedics, maybe, or Daniel looking for me. I couldn't tell, but it didn't matter. Time was slipping away, and I wasn't done. I scrolled further, my eyes catching on an email thread buried in the folder. The subject line was blank, but the sender's name, asterisk Laura H. asterisk, made my heart skip. I opened it, the words leaping off the screen like a confession etched in blood. Asterisk D, she's onto us. The merger's at risk if she keeps climbing. Coffee's ready, tonight or never. Asterisk sent last night. My throat tightened, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. They'd planned it here, in this room, over that damn bourbon, while I'd been at home prepping for a presentation they'd never intended me to give. The next email was Daniel's reply, short and brutal. Asterisk, do it. I'll handle the fallout. Asterisk, handle the fallout. Like I was a loose end to be tied up, a problem to be solved. I exhaled, shaky and slow, as the truth settled in. This wasn't just about the firm. It was about power, about their survival. The merger, some big deal I'd only heard whispers of, was their lifeline, and I'd been in the way, a threat they couldn't bribe or bully into submission. So they'd turned to poison, to cyanide in a special blend, betting I'd never see it coming. And I almost hadn't. The door swung open behind me, and I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. Daniel stood there, his face flushed, his tie askew, coffee stains still splattered across his shoes. His eyes flicked from me to the laptop, then back again, narrowing into slits. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, his voice low and dangerous, the panic from the dining room, replaced by something colder, harder. Finding out why, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I stood, stepping away from the desk, my phone still recording on the edge. "Why me, Daniel? Why the coffee? Why cyanide?" The questions spilled out, sharp and accusing, each one a jab at the mask he'd worn so well. He froze, his jaw tightening, his hands curling into fists at his sides. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but the words were hollow, a reflex. He took a step forward, and I backed up, my hip brushing the desk, the bourbon bottle wobbling behind me. Don't I? I shot back, nodding toward the laptop. I've got it all. Daniel. The spreadsheet, the emails, the coffee plan. You and Laura, you wanted me gone because I was better than you, because I was winning. His face twisted, a flash of something raw breaking through, anger, fear, maybe even shame. You think you're so damn smart. He spat, his voice rising. You have no idea what's at stake. The firm's bleeding, Emily. The merger's our last shot. And you were screwing it all up, dazzling everyone, making me look like a fool. So you tried to kill me? The words came out louder than I'd meant, echoing in the small room. My chest heaved, the fury spilling over, unstoppable now. Poison Daniel? That's your solution? He flinched just for a second, then straightened, his composure snapping back like a shield. It wasn't supposed to kill you, he said, his tone clipped, defensive. Just slow you down, keep you out long enough to close the deal. Laura, she got carried away. I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound that startled even me. Carried away? She's on the floor out there, choking on your special blend, and you're calling it carried away? I grabbed my phone, holding it up, the red dot still blinking. It's over, Daniel. I've got everything, her confession, your emails, all of it. His eyes widened, his gaze darting to the phone, then back to me. For a moment, he looked like a cornered animal. Wild, desperate, ready to lunge. Then the fight drained out of him, his shoulders slumping, his hands falling limp. You don't understand, he muttered, almost to himself. I had no choice. No choice. I stepped closer, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. You had every choice, Daniel. You could have fought fair, worked harder, been better. Instead, you picked this cowardice, betrayal, poison. And for what? A merger? A corner office? I shook my head, the disgust rising like bile. You're pathetic. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant wail of sirens outside. The paramedics were leaving, probably with Laura in tow, and the cops wouldn't be far behind. Daniel stared at me, his face pale, his empire crumbling in real time. I didn't feel triumph, not like I'd expected, just a hollow ache, a realization of how deep the rot went, how far I'd had to fall to claw my way out. I turned off the recording, the red dot fading to black, and slipped the phone into my purse. See you in court, I said, brushing past him toward the door. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, a shadow of the man I'd once feared. The hallway swallowed me up, the condo's chaos rushing back, the paramedics' radios crackling, the guests' whispers rising, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. I'd exposed them, saved myself, maybe even the score. But as I stepped into the light, the victory felt brittle, fragile, like it might shatter under the strain of what came next. The condo's front door slammed shut behind me, the sound swallowed by the wail of sirens cutting through the Atlanta morning. My legs carried me forward, unsteady but relentless, down the carpeted hallway toward the elevator. The air out here was thinner, less suffocating than the study's leather and bourbon haze, but it did nothing to loosen the knot in my chest. My purse banged against my hip, the phone inside it a ticking bomb. Laura's confession, Daniel's unraveling, all caught in that blinking red. It was my lifeline now, my proof, but it felt heavier than ever, like I was carrying their sins along with my own. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open with a cold metallic groan. I stepped inside, the mirrored walls throwing my reflection back at me. Disheveled hair, flushed cheeks, eyes too wide, too wild. I looked like a woman on the edge, and maybe I was, The doors closed, sealing me in, and I pressed the button for the lobby, my finger trembling against the worn plastic. The descent was slow, each floor a heartbeat, each jolt a reminder of what I just walked away from. Daniel's face flashed in my mind, pale, defeated, a king dethroned, and Laura's crumpling into that bitter half smile as she'd whispered, asterisk, he wanted you gone, asterisk gone. The word clawed at me, raw and relentless, as the elevator hummed downward. I didn't have time to fall apart. Not yet. The paramedics had taken Laura, alive, barely, her pulse faint under their gloved hands. And the cops would be here soon, sniffing around the condo, piecing it together. I'd given them the opening, but I couldn't trust them to finish it. Not with Daniel's money, his connections, his ability to twist the truth into something unrecognizable. No, this was mine to end. I'd started it when I'd swapped those mugs, when I'd hit record, and now I had to see it through. The doors opened to the lobby, a sterile expanse of marble and glass, the doorman glancing up from his desk with a nod I barely returned. Outside, the ambulance lights pulsed red and blue against the building's facade. A crowd of gawkers already gathering on the sidewalk. I pushed through the glass doors, the February air biting at my skin, sharp and unforgiving. The paramedics were loading Laura into the back, her blonde hair spilling across the stretcher, an oxygen mask strapped to her face. Daniel wasn't with her. He'd stayed behind, probably scrambling to cover his tracks, to spin a story that'd keep him out of cuffs. I didn't care. Not right now. My focus narrowed to the ambulance, to the evidence still warm in my purse, to the doctor barking orders as they shut the doors. Hey, I called, my voice cracking as I jogged toward them. Heels skidding on the pavement. The doctor, a wiry man with graying hair and a clipboard, turned, his brow furrowing as I closed the distance. Wait, I need to talk to you. We're on a clock here. He snapped, his tone clipped, impatient. He waved a hand toward the ambulance, its engine rumbling to life. She's critical. Whatever it is, it can wait. No, it can't. I planted myself in front of him, my breath fogging in the cold. My hand dove into my purse, fingers brushing the phone as I pulled it out, the screen still glowing from the recording. She didn't just collapse. It was cyanide in the coffee. I've got proof. His eyes narrowed, flicking from me to the phone, then back again. The crowd murmured behind us. Their whispers a low buzz I couldn't shake. Cyanide, he repeated, skepticism heavy in his voice. You're saying someone poisoned her? Not someone, I said, my voice steady now, fueled by the anger simmering under my skin. Her brother. And it was meant for me. I thrust the phone toward him, hitting play, Laura's ragged whisper spilling out. Asterisk, it was cyanide. Just a little. Enough to make her sick. Asterisk, the doctor's face shifted, the skepticism giving way to something harder, more focused. I kept going, my words tumbling out fast. I swapped the cups. She drank it instead. There's more emails, plans. They wanted me out of their way. He held up a hand, cutting me off, his gaze darting to the ambulance as the driver leaned out, shouting something about time. You're coming with us, he said, decisive, no room for argument. If this is real, we need that recording. And you at the hospital. Now, I nodded, my throat tight, and followed him to the ambulance's passenger side. The door slammed shut behind me, the interior a blur of beeping machines and antiseptic sting. Laura lay strapped to the stretcher, her chest rising and falling in shallow bursts, the paramedics hovering over her with IVs and monitors. I slid into the seat beside the doctor, my purse clutched in my lap, the phone still in my hand like a weapon I couldn't put down. The siren screamed to life as we peeled out, the city streaking past in a haze of gray and glass. The hospital was 10 minutes away, but it felt like hours, each second stretching thin under the weight of what I'd done. The doctor, Dr. Patel, his name tag read, scribbled notes on his clipboard, his voice low as he muttered to the paramedics about tox screens and antidotes. I stared at Laura, her face pale and slack, and felt the storm inside me shift, relief souring into something darker, something jagged. She tried to kill me. Daniel had ordered it. And now she was here, fighting for her life because I'd turned their plan back on them. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant, but all I felt was the pressure building, a vice tightening around my ribs. You all right? Dr. Patel's voice broke through, sharp but not unkind. He didn't look up from his notes, but his tone carried a weight I couldn't ignore. No, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop it. My hands tightened around the phone, my knuckles whitening. But I will be. He grunted, a sound that might have been approval, and went back to his work. The ambulance jolted over a bump, and Laura's monitor beeped louder, a shrill warning that made my pulse spike. The paramedic adjusted something, muttering under his breath, and I forced myself to look away, out the window at the blur of Peachtree Street. My mind raced, piecing together what came next. Cops, lawyers, the firm's board, a courtroom if I played it right. But beneath the strategy, the fury burned hotter, fueled by every memory of their smiles, their lies, their hands pouring poison into my life. The hospital loomed ahead, its white bulk cutting through the skyline, and the ambulance screeched to a halt at the ER bay. Doors flew open, voices shouting, wheels rattling as they pulled Laura out. I followed, my legs numb but moving, Dr. Patel barking at a nurse to prep a tox team. The chaos swallowed us, gurneys clattering, monitors shrieking, the air thick with adrenaline and bleach. They wheeled Laura through double doors, her stretcher disappearing into the fray. And I stood there, frozen, the phone still clutched in my hand. Miss Carter. Dr. Patel's voice pulled me back. He stood a few feet away, his clipboard tucked under his arm, his eyes sharp on mine. You're with me. We need to get that evidence to security and call the police. You ready? I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yeah, let's do it. He led me down a corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum. Nurses darted past, their scrubs a blur of blue and green, their voices clipped with urgency. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with the weight of antiseptic and fear. But I kept moving, my heels echoing in the sterile silence between us. We reached a small office. Security, he'd said, and he pushed the door open, gesturing me inside. A uniformed guard looked up from a desk cluttered with monitors, his brow furrowing as Dr. Patel launched into an explanation. Cyanide, coffee, attempted murder. I sank into a chair, the vinyl creaking under me, and set the phone on the desk. The guard, Rodriguez, his badge red, picked it up, his fingers careful like it might bite. He plugged it into a laptop, the recording spilling out again, Laura's voice tinny, but clear through the speakers. I stared at the floor, the tiles scuffed and gray, as her confession played. Asterisk, enough to make her sick. Keep her out of the way. Asterisk, my stomach churned, the words hitting harder this time. Each one a nail in the coffin of the life I'd known. Rodriguez paused the audio, his eyes flicking to me. This is heavy, he said, his voice low, cautious. You've got names, dates, a motive. Cops will want this ASAP. They're on their way. Dr. Patel cut in, glancing at his watch. 5 minutes, maybe less. She's stable for now, Laura Hart, but we're running the tox screen to confirm. If it's cyanide, we'll know soon. I nodded, my hands clasped tight in my lap, the anger simmering beneath a thin layer of exhaustion. Stable. She'd live. Then live to face what they'd done, what I'd undone. A part of me wanted her to pull through, to sit in a courtroom and look me in the eye while I tore their world apart. But another part, a darker, uglier part, Wished she'd choked on that coffee. Wished I'd never had to see her face again. The contradiction gnawed at me, a moral tug-of-war I didn't have the strength to fight. You did the right thing, Dr. Patel said, his voice softer now, pulling me out of the spiral. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his gaze steady. Swapping the cups, recording it, you saved yourself. Maybe her, too. Did I? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I looked up at him, my eyes burning. I didn't want this. I just wanted to work, to win, to be good at something. Not this. He didn't answer right away, just watched me, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged, a small, tired gesture. Sometimes good isn't enough. Not when people like that are in the game. The door burst open before I could respond. 2 uniformed cops striding in, their radios crackling with static. Rodriguez stood, handing over the phone, launching into a recap as Dr. Patel stepped aside. I stayed seated, my body heavy, my mind racing ahead to interrogations, depositions, the trial that had ripped the firm apart. The cops' voices blurred into background noise, their questions sharp but distant. Asterisk, when did you first suspect? Why didn't you call us sooner? Asterisk, I answered on autopilot, my words clipped, my focus narrowing to the one thing that mattered. Daniel. He was still out there, back at the condo, probably shredding papers, calling lawyers, building a wall of denials. But I had the recording, the emails, the truth. He'd underestimated me. Thought I'd sip that coffee and fade away, a quiet casualty of his ambition. Now he'd pay for it. The thought fueled me, a spark of resolve cutting through the haze, hardening into something unbreakable. The cops finished, one of them pocketing my phone. Evidence now, they said, I'd get it back later. And told me to stay put, that they'd need more later. Rodriguez offered coffee, and I almost laughed, the irony bitter on my tongue. I shook my head, leaning back in the chair, the vinyl cold against my spine. Dr. Patel lingered by the door, his clipboard back in hand, his eyes flicking to me one last time. You're tougher than you look, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Hang in there. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut, leaving me alone with the hum of the monitors and the weight of what came next. The crisis wasn't over, not by a long shot. Daniel would fight, clawing at every thread to pull himself out. And I'd have to face him, armed with nothing but the truth and a resolve I hadn't known I had. The pressure was crushing, a tidal wave building behind me, but I wouldn't break. Not now, not after this. The fluorescent lights in the hospital security office buzzed relentlessly, a harsh drone that burrowed into my skull as I sat there, the vinyl chair creaking beneath me. The air was stale, tinged with the faint tang of disinfectant, and the ghost of bad coffee lingering from some earlier shift. My hands rested in my lap, fingers twisted together, so tightly my knuckles ached, but I couldn't unclench them. Not yet. The cops had just left, their boots echoing down the corridor, my phone now a sealed evidence bag in their possession. Rodriguez, the guard, was back at his desk, his eyes flicking between the grainy CCTV feeds flickering on his monitors. Dr. Patel was gone too, off to oversee Laura's talk screen, leaving me alone with the weight of what I'd set in motion. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in, the hum of the monitors amplifying the silence between me and the chaos waiting outside. I could still hear it faintly, the muffled clatter of the ER, the hiss of radios, the distant wail of another ambulance pulling in. But here, in this cramped box of a room, time seemed to hang, suspended, like the moment before a storm breaks. My chest tightened, a slow squeeze that made every breath a fight. I'd done it. I'd handed over the recording, spilled the truth, turned their poison back on them. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me, waiting to see if I'd fall or fly. The door swung open, shattering the stillness, and I jolted upright, my pulse spiking. A cop stepped in, not one of the pair who'd just left, but a new face, older, with gray threading through his buzz cut, and a jaw set like concrete. His badge read Sergeant Malone, and the way he carried himself, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, told me he wasn't here for small talk. Rodriguez straightened in his chair, but Malone barely glanced at him, his gaze locking onto me instead. Emily Carter? His voice was gravelly, worn, like he'd seen too many nights like this. I nodded, swallowing hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. We need you downtown. Now. Things are moving fast. Downtown. My voice came out thinner than I'd meant, and I hated it, hated how small it made me sound. I stood, forcing my legs to steady, my hands smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. What's happening? Malone didn't answer right away, just jerked his head toward the door, a silent command to follow. I grabbed my purse, the strap biting into my shoulder as I trailed him out into the corridor. The hospital was a blur around us, nurses darting past with charts, a janitor pushing a mop, the antiseptic sting sharper out here, but Malone moved with purpose, his stride long and unyielding. I had to half-jog to keep up, my heels clicking against the linoleum, each step a jolt through my already frayed nerves. Laura Hart stabilized. He said finally, his voice low as we rounded a corner toward the exit. Tox screens back. Cyanide, like you said. She's awake, talking. And Daniel Hart's in custody. They pulled him out of that condo 20 minutes ago, kicking and screaming about his lawyer. My stomach lurched, a mix of relief and dread crashing together. Laura awake. Daniel caught. It was real now, no backing out, no pretending it was just a bad dream. I pictured him, his tie askew, his polished veneer cracking as they cuffed him, his voice barking denials into the Atlanta night, and Laura rasping out her side of it from a hospital bed, her perfect updo flattened against a pillow. The image should have felt good, a clean cut of justice, but it didn't. It just made the knot in my chest tighter, the stakes higher. We pushed through the Yar's glass doors, the cold February air hitting me like a slap. The parking lot was a circus, cruisers flashing red and blue, a newsvan already nosing in, its crew scrambling to set up a shot. Malone steered me toward an unmarked sedan, its engine idling, exhaust curling into the night. Get in, he said, opening the passenger door. I slid inside, the leather cold against my legs, and he climbed in after me, slamming his door with a force that rattled the frame. The drive was silent at first, the city streaking past in smears of neon and shadow, Peachtree's glitzy storefronts giving way to the grittier edges of downtown. My mind raced, filling the quiet with questions I didn't dare ask. What had Laura said? Was Daniel confessing or doubling down? And me, what did they need me for now? I'd given them everything, the recording, the emails, my story. But Malone's jaw was tight, his hands gripping the wheel like he was bracing for something. And that scared me more than I wanted to admit. Station's a madhouse, he said at last, his eyes fixed on the road. Press got wind of it. Attempted murder, cyanide, big shot lawyer family. They're calling it the coffee case already. He snorted a dry, humorless sound. You're the star witness, Carter. Laura's pinning it all on Daniel. Says he forced her, threatened her into it. He's saying she's lying, that you framed them both. It's a damn mess. And you're the one holding the key. The star witness. The words landed heavy, a crown I didn't want. I leaned back against the headrest, my breath fogging the window. I didn't frame anyone. I said, my voice sharp, defensive. They tried to poison me. I just fought back. Malone glanced at me, his eyes narrowing for a split second before softening, just a flicker, but enough to tell me he believed me. I know, he said, turning back to the road. Got the recording to prove it, but this ain't gonna be clean. Hart's got pull, money, friends in high places. They'll drag it out, twist it. You ready for that? I didn't know. My hands curled into fists again, nails digging into my palms as the precinct loomed ahead, a squat, gray building bristling with antennas and floodlights. I thought of the firm, the late nights, the deals I'd bled for, all of it tainted now, a battlefield I'd never wanted to fight on. And Daniel, his voice, smooth and smug, promising me the world while he brewed that special blend behind my back. The anger flared again, hot and bright, cutting through the exhaustion. Ready or not, I wasn't letting him win. Yeah, I said, my voice steadier this time. I'm ready. Malone pulled into the lot, tires crunching over gravel, and killed the engine. The precinct doors swung open ahead of us, spilling light and noise, cops shouting, phones ringing, a reporter's mic getting shoved back by an officer's hand. He led me inside, the chaos swallowing us whole, and I felt it, the tipping point, the moment where it all crashed together. Laura's confession, Daniel's arrest, my evidence, they were dominoes, and I'd knocked the first one down. Now, I had to watch them fall. They put me in an interrogation room, a bare box of cinder block and steel, the table scratched with years of initials and curses. Malone left me there with a styrofoam cup of water I didn't touch, promising he'd be back with the lead detective. The fluorescent bulb overhead flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls, and I sat there, staring at my reflection in the one-way mirror. I looked like hell, hair tangled, blouse rumpled, eyes hollowed out by adrenaline and betrayal. But beneath it, there was something else, something hardening in me, a resolve I hadn't felt before. The door opened again, and a woman stepped in, mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She carried a file thick with papers, her badge glinting under the light, Detective Reyes. She didn't smile, didn't waste time on pleasantries, just dropped the file on the table and sat across from me, her chair scraping the floor. "You've had one hell of a day, Miss Carter," she said, her voice low, measured, like she was sizing me up. "Let's talk about it." I nodded, my hands unclenching at last, resting flat on the table. "Where do you want to start?" She flipped open the file, her fingers deft, pulling out a photo, Laura on the stretcher, oxygen mask strapped tight, her eyes half open and glassy. "Here," she said, sliding it toward me. She's awake, coherent, and scared out of her mind. Says Daniel planned it all, cyanide in the coffee, your coffee, to knock you out of the game. She's begging for a deal. Problem is, he's saying the opposite. Says you spiked the coffee, set them up to take the fall. My breath caught, a spike of fury cutting through me. "That's a lie," I snapped, leaning forward, my voice trembling with the effort to keep it steady. "I didn't set anyone up. I swapped the cups because I smelled it, something off like almonds, like poison. I recorded it. You've got the proof." Laura admitted it, right there in the dining room. Reyes didn't flinch, just watched me, her pen tapping a slow rhythm against the file. "I've heard it," she said. Her voice, his panic, the cyanide bit. It's damning. But Daniel's lawyer's already spinning it. Says you had motive, jealousy, ambition, a grudge. Says you doctored the recording, planted the emails. We've got your phone, the laptop from the study, but it's your word against his until forensics backs it up. "Then let it," I said, my voice rising, the anger spilling over now. "Test the coffee, mine, Laura's, whatever's left. Check the mugs, the condo, his damn hands if you have to. I didn't do this. They did." She held my gaze, unblinking, then nodded, a small, tight gesture. "We're on it. CSI's tearing that place apart as we speak. But I need more from you, every detail, every memory. If we're taking them down, it's got to be airtight." I exhaled, shaky but resolute, and started talking. The brunch, the strange smell, the sickness I'd brushed off for months. Thanksgiving, the lake house, every time I trusted them and paid for it. Reyes listened, her pen scratching across her notepad, her face a mask of focus. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered, each one a brick in the wall I was building against them. My hands steadied. My voice grew stronger, the fear giving way to something fiercer, a need to see this through, to watch them face what they'd done. Hours bled by, the room growing colder, the water in the cup going flat. Reyes asked questions, sharp, probing, digging into corners I hadn't touched yet. Why had I gone to the study? What did the emails say, word for word? How long had I suspected? I answered it all, my mind replaying every second. The click of the laptop keys, Daniel's voice cracking in the doorway, Laura's bitter laugh as she'd confessed. By the time we finished, my throat was raw, my body heavy, but the fire inside me burned brighter than ever. Reyes closed her file, standing with a slow, deliberate stretch. That's enough for now, she said, her tone softer, almost approving. We've got a solid start. Your recording, the talk screen, the emails if they hold up. Daniel's in a cell downstairs. Laura's under guard at the hospital. Tomorrow's the arraignment. You'll need to be there. I will, I said, standing to, my legs stiff but holding. I'm not running from this. She gave me a long look, then a nod. Good. Get some rest if you can. It's going to get uglier before it's over. She left, the door clicking shut behind her, and I sank back into the chair, the silence rushing back in. Rest. The word almost made me laugh. My apartment was miles away, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. But as I sat there, the precinct's hum filtering through the walls, I felt the shift, a line crossed, a fight I couldn't unchoose. Daniel and Laura had wanted me gone, erased, a footnote in their climb. Instead, I turned their weapon against them, and now I'd finish it. The arraignment loomed ahead, a courtroom showdown I could already picture. The judge's gavel, Daniel's glare, Laura's frail defiance from a hospital feed. It'd be brutal, a public gutting of their lies and mine, but I'd be there, front row, my evidence their noose. The cost was steep, my trust, my career, the quiet life I'd once chased, but the justice, the reckoning, that was worth it. I'd make sure of it. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a sterile tang that clung to the back of my throat as I sat in the witness box, the oak railing cool beneath my palms. The chamber was smaller than I'd imagined, none of the grand, echoing halls from TV dramas, just a tight rectangle of muted beige walls and humming fluorescent lights. The gallery behind me rustled with whispers, a restless hum of reporters, firm colleagues, and strangers drawn by the headlines. The coffee case, they still called it, a year after that brunch turned my life inside out. My hands rested in my lap, steady now, no trace of the tremor that had haunted them back then. I'd learned to bury it, to channel the chaos into something harder, something unbreakable. The judge's bench loomed ahead, a stern slab of mahogany, and beyond it Daniel and Laura sat at the defense table, flanked by their lawyers, a pair of slick suits with sharp eyes and sharper tongues. Daniel looked thinner, his jaw tight, his tailored blazer hanging loose on a frame whittled down by months in lockup. His gaze flicked to me, once dark and unreadable, then away like I was a ghost he couldn't face. Laura was frilier still, her blonde hair dulled to a limp ash, her hands cuffed to a wheelchair the hospital had insisted on. Cyanide had left its mark. Her breaths came shallow, her skin waxy under the courtroom lights, but her eyes still burned. A flicker of defiance I knew too well. They weren't broken, not yet, but they would be. The prosecutor's voice cut through the air, crisp and deliberate, as he paced before the jury box. Ms. Carter, can you walk us through that morning, February 27th, 2025, at Laura Hart's condo? Start with the coffee. His name was Ellis, a wiry man with a boxer's build and a knack for turning questions into weapons. I'd liked him from the first deposition, his quiet intensity a mirror to my own. I leaned into the mic, my voice steady, carrying across the room with a clarity that surprised even me. I arrived around 10. Laura greeted me, all smiles like always. Daniel handed me a mug of coffee, white, plain, nothing special about it except the smell. Sharp, chemical, wrong. I didn't drink it. My eyes drifted to the jury. 12 faces, some rapt, some skeptical, and I held their gaze, letting the weight of it sink in. I'd been sick before, after meals with them. Thanksgiving, a lake house barbecue, too many times to call it chance. That smell, it clicked. I knew something was off. Ellis nodded, his hands clasped behind his back. And what did you do next? I swapped the cups. I said, the words flat, unapologetic. A murmur rippled through the gallery, but I didn't flinch. Laura's mug was on the table, black, half full. I stumbled, made it look accidental, and switched them. She drank from mine. Then she collapsed. My chest tightened at the memory. Her gasp, the coffee spilling dark across the floor, but I pushed it down, kept my face still. I recorded it after. Daniel's panic, Laura's confession, cyanide, she said, to keep me out of the way. The courtroom went quiet, a heavy, electric hush. Ellis let it hang, then turned to the evidence table, lifting a sealed bag with my phone inside. This recording, entered as Exhibit A, corroborates your account. Laura Hart admitting to cyanide, Daniel Hart implicated in the plan. Correct. Yes, I said, my voice firm. It's all there. Daniel's lawyer shot up, a tall man with a predator's grin. Hadley, his name was a shark in pinstripes. Objection, Your Honor. The witness's actions, tampering with evidence, swapping cups, cast doubt on her credibility. She's no victim, she's a participant. The judge, a graying woman with a face carved from stone, peered over her glasses. Overruled. The witness's actions are part of the narrative. You'll have your chance on cross, Mr. Hadley. Her gavel tapped once, sharp and final. And Hadley sat, his jaw twitching. Ellis stepped closer, his tone softening, but his eyes stayed hard. Why, Miss Carter? Why did they target you? I exhaled, slow and controlled, my gaze drifting to Daniel. Then Laura. I was good at my job. Too good, they thought. The firm was theirs, Daniel's legacy, but it was bleeding money. A merger was their lifeline. And I was in the way, closing deals, winning clients, climbing faster than they could stand. Laura said it herself. I was too smart. They couldn't buy me off, couldn't scare me. So they tried poison. The jury shifted, a few leaning forward, others scribbling notes. Ellis nodded, satisfied, and turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. He sat, leaving me exposed under Hadley's glare as he rose for the cross. Hadley approached, his steps deliberate, his voice smooth as oil. Miss Carter, you admit to swapping the cups, deliberately putting my client, Laura Hart, in harm's way. Isn't that revenge, not self-defense? No, I shot back, meeting his stare. It was survival. I didn't know what was in it, just that it wasn't right. They'd been making me sick for months. I wasn't waiting to find out if that cup was the end game. He smirked, circling like a vulture. And this recording, convenient, isn't it? You, an ambitious woman, jealous of Daniel Hart's firm, staging a scene to ruin them. Did you plant the cyanide yourself? The accusation stung, a jab at the doubt I'd buried deep, but I didn't waver. No, I didn't need to. They did it, planned it, brewed it, handed it to me. The emails from Daniel's laptop, the talk screen, they back me up. You've got no proof I staged anything, because I didn't. Hadley paused, his smirk faltering, then pressed on, hammering at my story, my motives, my timing, my every word. I answered each blow, calm, precise, the fire inside me burning steady. The jury watched, their faces shifting, skepticism softening into something heavier, something like belief. When Hadley finally sat, his tie askew, I felt the air change, a tide turning in that cramped, suffocating room. The trial stretched on, days of testimony, forensic reports, Laura's frail voice from the stand, pinning it all on Daniel while he glared daggers at her, then me. But that first day, my day, set the tone. The verdict came fast. A week later. Guilty, both of them, attempted murder, conspiracy, sentencing pending. As the gavel fell, Daniel's head dropped, Laura's eyes closed, and I walked out into the Atlanta sun, the weight lifting just a little. Justice wasn't sweet. It was bitter, jagged, a scar I'd carry, but it was mine. A year later, the ballroom of the Atlanta Marriott buzzed with a different energy, warm, electric, alive with the clink of glasses and the murmur of 1,000 voices. The chandelier overhead glittered, throwing light across the sea of suits and dresses, the air thick with perfume and ambition. I stood backstage, my hands smoothing the silk of my navy blazer, my keynote speech folded in my pocket. The banner above the stage read Southeast Legal Summit 2026, and my name, Emily Carter, blazed in bold letters beside it. A year ago, I'd been a target, a pawn in someone else's game. Now, I was the one they came to hear. The stage manager waved me forward, a quick nod, and I stepped into the light, the crowd's applause swelling around me like a wave. The podium was sleek, modern, a far cry from that courtroom box, but the weight felt familiar. Eyes on me, judging, waiting. I gripped the edges, my gaze sweeping the room. Lawyers, CEOs, faces I'd once pitched to, now staring up at me with something like awe. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with a quiet, hard-earned pride. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear carrying over the hush. A year ago, I stood in a different kind of room, one where trust was a weapon and ambition nearly cost me my life. The crowd leaned in, the air thickening with their focus. I'm here tonight because I fought back, not with poison, but with truth. And I learned something. Power isn't a corner office or a family name. It's what you do when the odds are stacked against you. I paused, letting it sink in, my eyes drifting to the back of the room. Empty seats where Daniel and Laura might have sat. Once. They were gone now, locked away. Daniel for 15 years, Laura for 8, their empire ash. The firm had collapsed, its clients scattering, its name a cautionary tale. I'd walked away, started over, consulting, speaking, carving a path no one could take from me. The scars remained. Nights I still woke shaking, the taste of almonds haunting my dreams, but they'd forged me into something stronger. The law isn't just about winning. I continued, my tone softening, reflective. It's about what's right, what's fair. I lost a lot to learn that friends, a career I loved, a piece of myself I'll never get back. But I gained something too, a voice, a fight, a chance to stand here and tell you it's worth it. My hands relaxed, the speech unfolding in my mind, not on paper. So tonight, I'm not just talking about cases or contracts. I'm talking about us, small players in a big game, daring to push back. That's where the real power lives. The applause roared up, loud and unrelenting. As I stepped back, the lights blurring into a warm haze. I smiled, not the tight, forced curve of that brunch, but something real, something mine. Backstage, the manager clapped my shoulder, muttering about a standing ovation, but I barely heard him. I slipped out a side door, the February air cool against my skin, the city skyline glittering beyond the hotel's glass walls. I leaned against the railing, my breath fogging in the night, and let it settle. This new life, this new me. The trial had closed a door. The speech had opened another. I wasn't the Emily Carter who'd walked into Laura's condo, naive and trusting, nor the one who'd stumbled out, raw and raging. I was something else now, tougher, wiser, a woman who'd faced the abyss and climbed out holding the rope. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but bright. And for the first time in years, I felt ready not just to survive, but to thrive.